Welcome back. This is Psychology Applied to Work, Lecture 7, Job Analysis. All right. Recall that our last lecture was a bonus lecture, Groups and Complexity. It was probably fairly complex, but it was for extra credit. The good news is today's lecture is absolutely not complex. Should be a nice breath of fresh air for you, that are those of you who are maybe a bit overwhelmed by the last lecture. So last time we talked about group process and group process research. We talked about wisdom of the crowd, and we also talked a little bit about madness of the crowd, things like information cascades and manias. We mentioned witch hunts and those sorts of things. We talked about how sometimes the crowd is smarter than the individuals, and sometimes the crowd goes a little mad and polarizes. And we talked about group polarization is the phenomenon where the collective decision of a group is sometimes a little bit more or less extreme than the average of the members of the group. So it sort of moves the needle in one direction or the other away from the average. And then we talked about complexity, and we used the example of a 2-body versus 3-body problem to try to help you develop an intuition for multidimensional complexity. And that's a sort of a difficult concept, and I don't think I did my best at explaining that, but I didn't quite have the heart to do another take. Maybe next year I'll give that one another try to make it a little bit more easier to understand. But hopefully some of you followed that, and some of you found that insightful. And then we talked about the implications of the fact that the world is actually, multidimensional and far more complex than than our brains would like to take it in. And we talked about how we developed culturally evolved heuristics to simplify, to dimensionally reduce, to make sense by telling a simple story of that complexity, and how often that's very useful and frankly absolutely essential for us to get by. But that sometimes that dimensional reduction, that simplistic framing, that reduced dimension view of what is really a multiple dimension complex phenomenon sometimes gets us into trouble, and we find ourselves where our model doesn't quite match what we're experiencing. All right. Well, today is going to be straight into the meat of IO psychology. Some basic workhorse elements that are used in human resources departments on a regular basis. This will be a straightforward lecture. It's likely to be a short lecture, which I feel I kind of owe you, because a few of my lectures have gone over a little bit. I'm trying to keep a balance there. So I also talked last time that we were laying the foundation. So we talked about what IO psychology is, and we talked about the history, and we talked about the science and analysis of it, and then I gave you 2 bonus lectures to try to frame sort of the complex backdrop that this stuff is happening in. Well, now we're getting into IO psychology, and this is a nice, easy introduction here with something pretty basic: job analysis. And when we talk about job analysis, we'll talk about what is the information involved in job analysis. We'll talk about the what of the job. What is it that somebody does? But we'll also talk about the how. How does one go about doing that? And it should make sense to you what those distinctions are. And then we will get into what is the utility of job analysis. What do you do with a job when you're done with the job analysis and you have analyzed a job? What do you do with that information? And then we will get into a tiny bit more detail about that process of gathering that information for job analysis. And then we'll talk about work-focused versus worker-focused job analysis. Okay, let's get into this. What is job analysis? Well, jobs change. Business models change, markets change, technology, culture evolves. This should be pretty clear by now from previous lectures. And a job is something that also is undergoing change, and periodically it's a good idea to reassess exactly what is it this job is, how has technology changed, how has culture changed, how has the markets changed, and a lot of times a person will adapt in their job, and then several years later they realize that the nature of their job is quite a bit different, and it's a good idea to come in and do an analysis of that. And it should be pretty obvious as to why someone would want to do that. And also remember, jobs sometimes go poof. There aren't typing pools anymore. So much things are paperless as well. The job, many of the jobs that exist today aren't likely to will exist or be called what they are right now, or certainly exist in their present form in a decade or two. So. And lots of new jobs are then going to emerge, and new jobs are emerging as we speak. And we typically don't know. I mean, we know when we actually have a job. Hey, we got to have various data scientists, and there's weird jobs now like data wranglers and interesting taxonomy for nomenclature of the taxonomy of jobs in data science is pretty interesting. And most of the software world gets pretty cheeky with how they name stuff. But a lot of those things weren't on the radar a few years back. So, and a few years from now, there'll be even more jobs that don't exist right now. And people talk about artificial intelligence, and now artificial intelligence is replacing jobs, and that's true. But at the same time, new jobs emerge, and some people speculate that a job that we can't really define right now, but will probably be a very high-skilled, sought-after, well-paid job in the future, is basically someone that can make the most of artificial intelligence, somebody that can determine the best way to put to use advanced artificial intelligence tools, and I mean, and to some extent. People in the machine learning and deep learning and data sciences world are already doing that, but the nature of that work in 10 years is going to be radically different. So this should be common sense. And if you think about when I started work, it wasn't standard to get a computer, and laptops were not things that happened in workplaces. And the email actually emerged during my career. And smartphones were different, really aren't that old either, and all of the connectivity and all of the IMs and social media, and then sort of social media within workplaces, which is sort of organizational centric gathering places digitally. Those are all new, so it's fascinating. It can be kind of scary if it's sort of your job that's on the line. It might go extinct. So this should give you an idea why we've got to stay abreast of this and keep track of the changing jobs and to document them. And so what documenting the job, but doing the analysis, it allows you to define it, allows you to describe that. What are the tasks that are done on this job? By defining it, you clear up ambiguity, you clear up confusion, and how to describe it. And a big deal here, it allows for scaling. So say you have one person, they're doing something that job has evolved over the years, and now that's a growth area, and you got to hire 2 more people. You want to scale the capacity that your organization has for that. Well, if you don't define it, it's really hard to actually say what it is that you're looking for. Well, we're looking for somebody that's like Susan, that does what Susan does. Well, you need to objectify that if you actually want to go out and find somebody. So to the extent that you can, you want that to be objective and measurable. Okay, so what kind of information do you gather? How do you go about doing a job analysis? And so there's a few different ways of doing it. And then the first is the people that are going to do the job analysis. Often, if it's a formal position, like within a consultant or within an HR department of a large organization, there might be people who actually have full-time jobs that are job analysts. but other times it often has to be done by hiring managers working with HR. Anyway, one of the common ways is you just interview people, interview the stakeholders, interview the people that need the outputs of this work, interview the people that do the inputs to the work, and interview the people that do the work. Another way is observe. You just sit and watch and pay attention and maybe ask some questions, and sort of that's a combination of interview observation. But this should be pretty straightforward. Or you ask people to fill out a form to describe what it is they do in a given day, and answer questions, and oftentimes you're going to be doing all three of these in order to gather enough information so you feel like you can properly describe the job. Another method is called the critical incident technique, which we'll describe on one of the future slides here today. Okay, where do you get the information? Where do you go? I talked about this a little bit. The job incumbent is the obvious place you start. If you have a person currently doing this work, or a portion of their job is this work, and you want to turn that into a full-time job because you have the need for growth. Sometimes this might be, you're opening up a whole new initiative, a new product line, a new whatever, and you've got to hire a bunch of people, and you might not actually have anybody doing these jobs, in which case you're going to try to do your best to try to describe what it is you think that this would do. But if there is somebody that currently does this job, that's the first place, the logical place, the incumbent. And then at the same time you go to that incumbent supervisor, or the supervisor that has the open space that you need to properly describe, as well as pulling in people who do this for a living. Whether they're within the organization or coming from outside. The job analysts who have access to and have experience with job definitions can often bring a lot of clarity and organization to the effort. And then any other people that are really relevant to defining this, subject matter experts, SMEs. There's also a couple places you can go within government databases. There's a link here as well. It's kind of fun to explore. And we'll talk about what KSAs are in just a little bit. But there's good government databases that you can go into to try to make your job that you're defining as objective as possible, as consistent with the way similar jobs in other organizations have been defined, which would then help you with hiring, with recruiting, with figuring out what the pay scale should be, and that sort of thing. So hopefully this is pretty straightforward for you. So the what, what is it that you do? What are the ways in which you describe the what of the job? What exactly does get done in the job? What are the main duties? What are the tasks? What are the goals of those tasks? What are the responsibilities? And then so you can think of the first thing as, what is it, the reoccurring important things, and another one is, what are the things that you have to do only once in a while, but you'd better know how to do them, because everything falls apart if you don't do this one thing. So some things are repetitive, reoccurring. You might do it every day. You might do it many times a day, but some things maybe you only do once a year, and sometimes that once a year really matters though. Okay, so these are the sort of layers or levels of description. You could think of them as granularity, where your finest grain on top getting coarser. So you have elements, activities, tasks, and duties. And elements together make up an activity. Activities together make up a task. Tasks together make up your duties. And there's no magic to this. It just seems you could choose other words to describe nested nested ways of doing things, tasks and subtasks and subtasks. But this is the convention that IO psychology has developed, that you might find in an HR department that does job analysis. So an element, what's the element? That's really the smallest, rational unit of work. And you have to be common sense in here, depending upon the nature of the job. So if it's an office job and you're expecting a certain level of understanding for even an entry-level person, you expect the person knows how to type and maybe knows how to use rudimentary Microsoft Office or Google Docs at some level. You won't have the element defined all the way down to which keys on the keyboard you strike. The rational first level is sort of the what's the baseline of education that you're expecting is an entry-level person. And so if this is like an office type job, a laptop holding type position, maybe it's to submit a work product, submit a file. You fill out a form on a spreadsheet doing for some activity, and you have to submit it by attaching it to something and sending it. And so, well, that action of submission could be an element, just like an action of going and getting the form could be an element. So elements are just the lowest level, smallest unit that makes sense. And if you're defining it lower than that, smaller than that, but it gets to be ridiculous because everybody knows how to do that, then you've gone too far. So, and then an activity is the next level up, which is what are the sequences of elements? What are the multiple elements you might do in parallel, and then what elements have to be done in a sequence in order to do an activity. So an activity might be you open up the form, you fill out you look up the information, you fill it out in the form, and you save the form and you submit the form. So each one of those steps would be an element, but the whole thing could be an activity. And then a task is the next level up. So a bunch of activities put together would be part of a task. So suppose your job is to do some sort of market analysis, and you have to look at a whole bunch of competitive products, and you have to fill out this form associated with it. So each step on the way of the form is an element. The filling out, the deciding on which, getting the form, picking the target, looking up the information, filling out the form, saving it, submitting it as your activity. And then you might do this to 37 or so, just pull in a number, products that are all, say, your company's competitive products, and you put them all together on these forms, and that might be part of your task. But you also might have as part of your task to put these together in summary with a document that says what your findings were. Make a spreadsheet that sort of reports each one of the forms. And then put that together in some sort of bound PowerPoint, and then present that. So maybe that's the task. So that all of those things together, are part of like a project. And so then that's the sort of the task level, and those are goal oriented. So there's a point to this, which is we need to understand our competitive landscape so we can decide what product to launch, and our goal is to launch a successful product. And so we have this task for you of doing this market analysis, and inside that task are all these activities and these elements. And then duties is the highest level, which is sort of the most abstract here, and that's all the tasks together, all the projects that you would do in this job, and what can be said about the overarching goal or responsibility associated with that. What is it you're trying to do? And it could be pretty high level, like make the company more profitable through these efforts. So duties are composed of tasks are opposed to activities are opposed to elements. It's not really a super intuitive structure in my opinion, but it's also not that hard, and it is a open book and open note test. So just know where to find this and get an idea for the levels here. So this should make sense, I hope. Okay, the next thing on job analysis is the how. So we just went over the what, and that's not really talking about more human-related things, and that'll make sense as we get through this slide. So what are the human attributes? What do we mean by a human attribute as opposed to a task, activity, element type attribute? Well, one of them is knowledge. What does a person, what does a human in this job need to know? I mean, it can be really simple. They need to be able to speak English in order to be able to follow directions. You know, maybe you have a factory position that has a lot of relatively lower skilled assembly work, and you might have new Americans as your employees, and you know, a certain level of proficiency in English really is a knowledge level in order to be effective. So what is that level that's needed in the job? You know, maybe in certain jobs it doesn't require tremendous English speaking skills. You know, some passing level. But at the same time, a position might require, you know, deep knowledge in computer architecture and advanced operating systems and a bunch of programming languages. You know, it really depends on the job. So what is this domain knowledge? What are the facts? What is the knowledge of various procedures and steps that are needed? So that's knowledge, which is a K for the KSAOs that we're going to be building up to here. Special rules, domain knowledge, might be stuff you get from a degree. And S is skills. You know, what are the skills needed? What must the person be proficient at? So this might be you need to be a really good communicator, or you need to be skilled, very experienced at Java or JavaScript or Python or whatever. If it's a computer language, you know, what are the things that are, you know, knowledge and skills, they kind of go hand in glove, but the skill is sort of the demonstrable thing. You know, I can program in Python, as opposed to I understand, you know, how software works with it and what's happening in a computer. So the knowledge is more generalized. It's not necessarily applied, and the skill is how you apply that knowledge. But a skill can also be, you know, a physical skill. You know, you can, if you want to work for Cirque du Soleil, you know, acrobatic skills don't involve programming, but they're definitely skills that'll make or break you to get the job. And if you don't have the skills, I mean, it might actually break you, because I mean the skills they involve doing potentially dangerous things. So knowledge and skills, and then abilities, and you know, what are the you know, innate capacities or things you're just really good at, that are needed for the job. And so, you know, some examples are, do you just have really good endurance? You just stick to stuff, and you just don't quit. You got really good resilience, or so you're just excellent managing your time. You know, you just don't get stressed out about stuff. I mean, to some extent, we're getting into the next one, which is other personal characteristics, which can include things like personality traits and even, you know, interests and preferences. O, so KSAO, the other personal characteristics, you know, that's a grab bag of all sorts of stuff that might be relevant, and it's sort of a everything else category. And so KSAOs are the how, and what you will do in a job analysis is establish these KSAOs for the how part of the job, and then you will rank them. You'll develop a rational way to score which K's are most needed, and which S's, which A's, and what O's, and then amongst all of the KSAOs, you know, how would you order them in terms of criticality? You might find some are absolutely essential to do a job, and some, you know, are desired but not needed. Hopefully you get the idea here. So remember, we'll go back one here. You've got elements, activities, tasks, and duties. That's the what. And you've got KSAOs, and that's the how. Okay, what do you do with this stuff? You know, what do you do with the job analysis? And so really there's a lot of purposes for this, and it should make sense to you. You know, job description's probably the most obvious thing. You know, almost any job in a mature organization will have a job description. If you apply for a job, you know, one of the things that you'll often be able to see online before you've even put in your application is some form of a job description, so you know what is it that this job does. So that should be pretty obvious. And there's ways of doing a job description, like sort of levels of description. You can have like a simple one-pager, or even a paragraph, or you could have a multi-page job description, really depending upon how in depth you need to go. And that helps obviously. Look at prospects for recruiting, helps your prospects also look at your positions, and for the two of you to get aligned, so that you find people and that those people find you, and you're both agreeing what it is that what position you're trying to fill. And then once you've found those candidates and you start the interviewing process, that job analysis and subsequent job description and list of KSAOs helps you look through your candidates to try to pick which one is most qualified for this role. And it also helps drive, what training is needed. So if you do a job analysis on maybe existing positions that a dozen people have, and you determine that 3 of them are deficient in certain KSAOs, for instance, and so you might develop a training program to help close those gaps so that you have more productive, effective, and efficient people in that role. So, and similarly, if you're hiring somebody right off the street into a role, what is it that the person will typically bring? If they have a degree in something or a little bit of experience in something, they might already have a certain level of these KSAOs and experience doing the elements and the activities and the tasks and the duties that match, but they might have some that they're typically lacking, and so you develop like an entry-level training or an onboarding training program. So that should make sense. And then it's obviously useful for determining whether somebody is doing a good job. And our next lecture is on job performance, which should make sense why it is coupled tightly to job analysis. So how do you know if somebody is doing a good job if you aren't at some level objectively defining what that job is? So it's essential for job performance. And then sometimes a job needs to be redesigned. Technology changes, markets change, and you use that original job analysis as a baseline, and you might go, okay, 5 years ago, Bob, you when we hired you, this was your job description when we hired you, but so much has changed and you've picked up so much other responsibilities and certain things don't even need to be done anymore. Let's look at that original job analysis, and it might just be a job description, but it might be something, with even more detail if it was a extensive job analysis. Let's look at that versus what you're doing right now, and let's update your job description. And then often that updated job analysis is critical for determining if you're paying enough to keep Bob in this case, or if you need to hire 7 more Bobs, and you want to post a position and you need to budget for those positions. Well, you need to know what do people in that role get for compensation? What is the market paying for that? And if you can't define what it is the job is, how do you know that you actually know what the pay should be? Okay, and then another thing KSAOs do is it helps tell colleges and high schools and vocational schools and tech schools what skills, what knowledge level is in demand. And so all of you are taking a university level class, and a number of you probably already have a declared major, and there is a well thought out educational plan for whatever that major is, and regardless of the major, there's a general education requirement at the university too, for a basic well-rounded university education. And part of that is the KSAOs that a typical organization is expecting of a college grad. So whether it's high school or college or a tech school, there is a relationship between organizations and what they're looking for and our educational system and what it's producing. So obviously we want people that think critically and are exposed to the world and those sorts of things. In a classic liberal arts education was designed around that. But we are a land grant university as well, and a lot of degrees are more targeted specifically for explicit roles in workplaces, And so a lot of the courses you're taking are for KSAOs. In fact, this course is a psychology applied to work. And this is knowledge that is very relevant to the workplace, that will make you a more effective employee in whatever organization that you work for. So we're working on your K of the KSAOs. So all of this hopefully makes good sense. And then another thing that's important why you should objectively define what the job is to make sure that you're doing the right thing by the law, that you're doing the right thing by the ethics of the organization, about being fair and about treating people equally. And if you have a situation where somebody is saying that they weren't treated fairly, you want as an organization to show that positions and performance were objectively defined and objectively measured, so that you can adequately and honestly defend yourself. All right, so how do you go about gathering information for job analysis? And this is just a little bit more detail than what we've already talked about. And so there's this SME again, and you'll run into that depending upon where it is that you make your career. You might find the term SME is just a regular term people use, or it might be something you never hear again. But SME is a common term in technical fields for sure. It just means subject matter expert, somebody that knows enough about a material, about information related to whatever the expertise is for. So subject matter experts are needed for job analysis, and obviously, like we've talked about, probably the number one place to look for subject matter expertise for a job is the person that is doing that job. So the incumbents are, number one SMEs. Supervisors are SMEs typically, because they have to provide work direction, and they have to know whether a job is being performed properly or not. They may or may not know the details of the work. Some supervisors come from the ranks, so to speak, and they used to do that exact job, and maybe in some cases they were the best at that, and that's what helped them become a supervisor. But oftentimes a supervisor is in that role because of a different set of skills, and they maybe have only a partial, really detailed understanding of what it is that the people that work for them do, but they still have at least a partial view. And so they are definitely SMEs when you're doing job analysis. And then obviously I mentioned before, there are people that do this for a living. They can bring to bear not just the government databases, but just past experience of previous jobs that have been analyzed, and then helps to develop a consistent system. I mean, you don't want to develop a scoring system and defining system that's just really unique to one department, and over here the job descriptions have different headings and different fonts, and they're in reverse order and all sorts of stuff. I mean, you want something consistently digestible that shares best practices about what the output is. If your output is like a job description, the more you have a job description that looks like other people's job description, the less confusion there is. All right, so how do you go about doing that? We mentioned observation, we mentioned interviews, and then you can basically have people fill stuff out. You can do surveys. All right, so we're going to talk about work-oriented versus worker-oriented job analysis. So this is a work-oriented job analysis is a what-oriented or a task-oriented job analysis. And the outcomes are often called task statements. These are the things. There's a sequence of activities with these elements that form this task. Here's a task statement, and these are the 17 tasks or 6 tasks that this job will typically do, and this is the frequency by which those tasks are typically done. And then you might map that to a worker-oriented job analysis, where you talk about what are the KSAOs needed for those task statements. So hopefully this makes sense. So descriptions of the work discretized into activities and elements, and then you're going to use the incumbents in the job often to help rank those things. So you have these task statements that have the activities and the elements. Just like you need to rank what are the most important KSAOs, you want to do the same thing with ranking the what of the job. And then part of the what is also, hey, what do you need? You need a laptop. Okay, well, does the laptop need to have a graphics processor in it or not? What size of monitor does it need to be? Do you need instrumentation to do your job? What kind of a workplace do you need? Do you need a vehicle to do your job? So what is the equipment? So this is all sort of practical stuff under the what. And then you might do a critical incident technique, and we mentioned that earlier, and we'll explain what that is now. It's pretty straightforward. And that's where you get subject matter experts to sit down and go, okay, let's get some examples here so we can really understand that of what actually, we want to hire these people, but we also need to assess their performance, and we want to maximize that performance. So how can we describe, using examples of what is poor performance and what is great performance, and can we define that, at a task level, maybe with even using real world examples, and these are critical incidents, and here are examples in which somebody did really badly, and it cost the organization a lot of money or time or brand damage or worse. And here's an incident that happened where somebody in this job, did amazing. And here's what they did that we feel is amazing. So this sort of helps contextualize things. It helps you sort of anchor performance expectations. Helps build a narrative about what is it that you're looking for in terms of really good performance here, and what are you trying to avoid in terms of poor performance. And so obviously a critical incident technique helps you build a sort of a calibrated scale to look at defining performance. And then the worker-oriented job analysis is the how again, and it's the KSAO-focused job analysis. So it's looking through what it is that the work is from a perspective of what does the human in the role need to have for knowledge and for skills and for abilities and for other characteristics. It's mostly focused on KSAs, at least in terms of a form to fill out and an output to create. O's are hard to predefine. I mean, there might be some O's that just clearly come with a job. A sales role and introversion is maybe a challenge, extra challenge, whereas sales role and certain types of sales for sure, and extroversion, and that's a personality dimension. So there might be some jobs in which you will intentionally include an O, another characteristic, but sometimes you might leave them out entirely if they're just too hard to define. But for sure, you're going to want to get your KSAs down. And you're going to want your subject matter experts to rank your KSAs for importance, and that's not that's not necessarily an easy thing, and especially from different perspectives. So you'll often have like a supervisor who will say, these are the important KSAs. Same thing with like the work oriented, where you have the elements and activities and tasks. You might have the supervisor level of things that says these are the important ones, and then these are the important KSAs. And then the person doing the job sometimes might be, yep, that's exactly right. Other times might be, no, they don't know what they're talking about. Supervisors, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand my job. Here's what's really important. The supervisor only cares about those things because his manager is asking him to report on it, and his performance is based upon the certain key metrics. So the only thing that he or she cares about is whether I do this task. But I tell you, if I wasn't doing these other 3 tasks, and if I didn't have this knowledge that my supervisor doesn't care about, the company would go under. I'm kind of going on an extreme here, but I mean, that's a real kind of example. You'll get a disconnect between subject matter experts. And then you might have a formal job analyst that maybe came from a corporate location, or even as an outside consultant that really doesn't know much of anything of the actual job, except for what level of observations and interviews that maybe this person did. And so that's definitely a limited information perspective about the specifics, but they bring, in some cases, a great deal of expertise about how similar jobs are defined, and they might have ways to dimensionalize, to describe the job that the supervisor and the actual incumbent, the other two subject matter expertise, just never thought about. So it's not, a clear-cut thing. And to do a good job, you're going to want to get everybody's perspective, and if you're the person who works for HR or you're a hiring manager trying to define a job so that you can post it, and you discover this job hasn't been well defined because things have changed so much since the original job description, you've got to get the perspective of those subject matter expertise, and you've got to figure out, you got to herd those cats, so to speak, and determine, what should the rank order be for KSAs, for instance, if you don't have easy agreement. That should give you a flavor of both what elements of this are really straightforward, and what elements are a little bit more difficult to get humans to agree on. And so one of the things you might look at when doing rank ordering, so to speak, the KSAOs, is, okay, what are we looking for an entry-level person? So somebody right out of school, somebody with no experience in this exact job, and they have, what is the minimum baseline stuff? Okay, they need to speak English, they need to be able to type, or they need to actually know how to use Excel, or they actually need to know how to program in Python. Whatever the job is, what's that minimum level of KSAO that they need? But then over time, what is it that we would expect of this person after say a month, after a year, after 2 years, after 5 years, if they're still in that role? To what extent are you going to define levels of proficiency? And can you get agreement on the criticality of those of the knowledge of the skills? What is it that how advanced does a person's knowledge need to be before you say they're no longer say a level 1, another a level 2, or a senior, or even past that? So a lot of positions have grades to them. In fact, it's quite common when people have a role that there's a ladder, aspirational ladder, a hierarchy again. And there's often pay associated, differences in pay to those levels, and sometimes a level 1, a level 2, or a level 3, or some cases things like senior, sometimes things like staff and senior staff. There's all sorts of ways you can keep building these ladder to the really, really high experts on something. But sometimes each one of those levels, level 1, level 2, level 3, might have its own job analysis, and sometimes you might have a job analysis that'll cover multiple levels. It really depends upon what makes the most sense for your organization. But what matters here is that KSAs, in terms of how much knowledge, how much skill, how much ability is expected of different levels of experience. Okay. So I said this was going to be a shorter lecture, and it was here. And let's recap. So we talked about job analysis. We talked about this actually twice in just a little bit more detail the second time around. What is the information that you need to do a job analysis? And we talked about the what and the how, and we actually revisited that again when we got into more detail. And then we talked about what is it that you do with job analysis, what's its utility, what's its purpose, and obviously things like a job description is the most obvious, but it's also used for compensation, and it's used for hiring and other things. And then we got into more detail about how you gather information, and then with regard to the what and the how, we looked at work-focused versus worker-focused job analysis, and some of the details in there. Okay, It's pretty straightforward. And next lecture, lecture 8, we're going to talk about the other side of this coin. So you've defined a job. You know what the tasks are, and you know what the KSAOs are, and you've got some idea. You've done some critical incident techniques. You've got some idea what constitutes, poor performance and really good performance. Well, how do you go about actually assessing job performance? What are the methods involved in that, and then what's some of the detail, what's some of the complexity involved in job performance. So we'll look at how you assess tasks for levels of performance, and then we'll talk about contextual performance, and what does that really mean, which is sort of the how are you performing in the context of beyond the task. You're doing a task. People are hiring you, paying you money to do a task, but they're also hiring you to be a team member of a larger organization. And how is your performance affecting, improving, helping, or not? Some of the larger organization in the context of your job. And then we'll look at what are things that are poor performance that might not be just task specific. So you can be crappy at your task. Okay, you were hired to do this task, and it turns you were hired to develop our website, and it turns out you actually have zero web development experience. That's a problem because apparently you can't do your job. So there's task performance that you might have poor task performance, but you could be really great. You could be the best web developer that we've ever seen, and yeah, people really want you gone, because you everywhere you look, you're making enemies, making mischief, and all sorts of stuff. So one term for that, at least within IO psychology here, is counterproductive work behavior, and a lot of times it's how your behavior affects other people. That you might be awesome at your individual work, but you actually might interfere with and screw up the productivity of others, and that's a real problem. And then we'll talk about job crafting, which is how do you look at somebody's performance? How do you look at somebody's abilities? You look at somebody's inherent KSAs. What's their experience? What are their affinities? What are they interested in, and what are their competencies? What are they good at and passionate about and engaged in, and then how do they work interpersonally with other people? And instead of just saying, hey, we did this job analysis, we have this job description, we hired you for this role, you're not really fitting well in this role, you do these things well, but these other things aren't well. Instead of just saying, hey, you have to go, that sometimes the smart thing to do is to recraft, retool, re-examine the job and say, okay, what are the things that this person does really well, and what are the things they don't do well? And maybe we could shift out responsibilities a little bit and move things around so that this person is more focused on the things they do really well. So that this person is always throwing their fastball, is an expression that is sometimes used. So all of these things under job performance are incredibly important things that for supervisors and managers in HR departments to try to get right as best they can. And it's certainly something that every employee at every level of a organization is going to experience, because everybody will go through their own what's called performance management. So it's kind of, you might not be involved at all in the job description of a job you're hired for, but you will be involved probably repeatedly in the assessment of your performance. So everybody's got a stake in this, and it's imperfect and inelegant, to say the least. And because of all of that complexity I was talking about in the bonus lectures and a little bit in the other lectures, job performance is, that's the $1 trillion thing. There's how do you get the best performance out of people, not just in the short run, which sometimes you can get some short-term performance with just fear. People are afraid to lose their job, and all of a sudden they put in the extra mile and extra effort for just a little while, but that's not sustainable. How do you get both in the short term and the long term, peak performance? can you? And if you can't do that because people have other things in their lives besides their job, what can you do to at least always move that arrow, of performance in the direction of better. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of job performance, but I want to sort of tee it up, and I'll add some things along the way to make sure you understand that this is one of the hard things. It's not hard to understand, it's hard to execute because of humans, and every individual human is so much different, and the circumstance and situation of the jobs are so different too. Okay, I hope that was interesting, and we will see you in lecture 8.